אם אשכחך ירושלים.
The Shloah HaKodesh writes, why is it that there's no Avelus on Shabbos? We mourn for 3 weeks, and the mourning period intensifies as we near Tisha Beav. You have Rosh Chodesh, you have the 9 days, you have Shavuot Shechalbo, you have Erev Tisha Beav, then you have Tisha Beav, but there's no Avelus on Shabbos. And the Shloah HaKodesh writes that the Avelus in itself is Binyan HaBais. And we have a rule. And Binyan Beis HaMikdash, Doiche Shabbos. If you're going to mourn on Shabbos, you're building, you're not allowed to build on Shabbos. That's just to show us how significant the cheshivus of the Avelus itself. The Chassam Sofer is mefarish a pasuk in Tehillim. Boine Yerushalayim Hashem, Nidchei Yisrael Yechanes. Says the Chassam Sofer, Boine Yerushalayim? Boine? Lashon Hoive, present tense. It should be Yivne Yerushalayim Hashem. However, the Chassam Sofer brings 3 Mekomis in Shas that we find Rosh Hashanah Daf Lamed, Psachim Daf Mem, Shavuos Daf Tesvav. Rashi and Tosfos maintain in 3 places in Shas the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi that we're waiting for will come down with a wall of fire. Says the Chassam Sofer, when we gather to mourn the destruction of Beis Hamikdash, when we sit and we cry, we're actually building the Beis Hamikdash. Boine Yerushalayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu builds Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash with our tears, right now, present tense, like we've been doing for the last 1953 years. And when the house will be ready by our tears and our Avelus, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring down what we, in fact, build. Yahawa's Dvash, we have this letter. He wrote a letter to his sister-in-law, who was sitting Shiva. She lost her husband. Listen to a language the Yahawa's Dvash says, it's just mamish unbelievable. Ve'emes achot, he's calling his sister-in-law, my sister. Mi'asher b'shem Yisrael yechune, anyone who calls himself a Yid, im yikach el libo churban Tzion v'Yerushalayim, if you really take to heart the destruction of Tzion and Yerushalayim, dei pele, it's a wonderment. How is it that you don't commit suicide? If in fact you took it into heart what happened, what we lost and where we are, we really should commit suicide. We were taken down from such a lofty level to such a lowly status, which extends for so many years. But what can you do, says the Yahawa's Dvash, but we're not allowed to commit suicide. But really, we should have entertained that thought in our minds. With all the years that passed by, it dimmed our emotions. But what was the cause for Churban Beis Hamikdash? You can take a Gemara from there. What was the cause for Churban Beis Hamikdash? First Beis Hamikdash, as we know, Yuma Daf Tes Amud Beis, 3 Averos Chamuros. The second Beis Hamikdash, says the Gemara that you oiskim b'toire uvegmilus chasadim. Why sinas china machloikis loshon hara? To tell you that it has the weight corresponding to the 3 Averos Chamuros. Asks Rabbi Yonason Eibshitz an unbelievable shayla. In Sefer Yosifun, we learn that the majority of the population in Eretz Yisrael in the time of Bayis Sheni were not in Eretz Yisrael. Very few people were here. And why? Because they couldn't stand the sinas chinam that was taking place in Eretz Yisrael. And if that's the case, the majority of Klal Yisrael are not here. They have nothing to do with the sinas chinam machlokes loshon hara that's taking place in Eretz Yisrael. So why was his language is why richka yeshuasam? Well, what happened exactly? Only very few people are responsible for what happened. Says the Yahawa's Dvash, yeah. But those people who sit in Eretz Yisrael have such weight, and their deeds impact Klal Yisrael, and in fact, the world entire. So it places such a burden and responsibility on us. But Chazal tell us that Midah Toiva Meruba times 500 than Midas Puranus. So if we can destroy how much we can build, rebuild, and create By midah toiva, we have tremendous, tremendous power. It is a responsibility, but it's a tremendous schus as well, and we have to make sure that we exercise it. I told over many times, but I think it's a mitzvah to say it over again. The Aderes was the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim about 90 years ago. Rabbi Eliyahu David Rabinowitz Teoimi. How did he become the Rav of Yerushalayim? The chief rabbi of Yerushalayim was Reb Shmuel Salant. He became very old. He was 91 years old, and he felt that he just can't continue. And therefore he asked that they should go to the Ponovitch and Mir. That's where the Aderes was the Rav, and they should bring him from Europe to replace him. He should be the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim. So they went and they convinced him, and a young 61 or 62 years old, the Aderes, comes to Yerushalayim to become the chief rabbi. We have a letter that the Aderes writes to his family back in Europe. And he writes to them, Anshe Yerushalayim think that they did me a big favor. They rented for me an apartment overlooking the Makom HaMikdash. And they think they did such a big favor. Every day I open the curtain and I see Makom HaMikdash, and they don't know that they're shortening my life, because every time I see Makom HaMikdash, my heart is broken. Niba velo yada maniba. He prophesied and he didn't know what he prophesied, because he only lasted 2 years in Yerushalayim. He passed away. Reb Shmuel Salant, who asked him to become the Rav instead of him, was still around, and he eulogized him. The Aderes wrote 120 Sforim. Only 2 were published during his lifetime. We still have a lot of handwriting Sforim. 118 of them that weren't published. But we go to the Koisel and we take pictures. We hug each other, smiles, we dance around the Koisel. We need to cry. But the truth is, we know how to cry. We know how to cry. When your neighbor buys a new car, you know how to cry. But we need to know how to cry for stones. But it's not true. We know how to cry for stones. When your neighbor replaces the marble floor, we know how to cry for stones. But we need to cry for a different type of stones. It's been many years that we're saying the kinos. It's been many years that we're learning the stories of destruction. Rabbi Chetzkel Abramsky used to say an unbelievable thing. He used to say, our Tisha B'Av reminds me of an old age home. And they looked at him, what? And he said, what do old people do in an old age home? They sit around with their slippers and think and talk about food all day long. What do we do in our Tisha B'Av? We sit around with our slippers and think and talk about food all day long. Then what time is the fast over? No, I just want to know. I'm going to Mevilna, 8:13, 8:15, 8:16. I just want to know. It could be that if we see that so many years have passed by and it's not working, that it's just not sufficient enough just to be sitting with slippers and talk and think about food all day long. There was a guy who took his son to the doctor. His son was sick. And the doctor prescribed antibiotics. So his father gives it to him for a week. No change. They go back to the doctor. And the doctor prescribes the same medicine. So the father gives it to his son, and there's no change. A week later, he comes back to the doctor and says, Doctor, didn't help. And the doctor prescribes again the same antibiotics. Tell me, how long will this continue before the father wakes up and says, it's not working? We've been sitting around 1953 years with our slippers saying the kinos, thinking about food. It's apparently just not strong enough. We need a more potent medicine. We still need to do what we do. We still need to do with the slippers and the kinos. But it seems that we have to add. And since Chazal told us the reasons for the destruction, those are the things that have to be rectified. Reb Tzadok HaKohen in Pri Tzadik, Parashas Dvarim, writes an unbelievable thing. We're about to learn the Agadita that relates to the destruction of Beis HaMikdash. Reb Tzadok HaKohen says, don't think that it's here accidentally. And he brings different examples. Masechet Shabbos Perek Rebbe Kiva, Perek Rebbe Kiva Daf Pei Zayin, Pei Ches, Pei Tes, we learn of Matan Torah. All the Agadita related to Matan Torah. Why is it Dafka plugged there? Says Reb Tzadok HaKohen, because Rebbe Kiva is the shoyresh of Torah Shebe'al Peh. Kuli Alma Moedi, everybody agrees, all the Tanaim, the Torah was given on Shabbos. Therefore, Dafka Matan Torah is in Masechta Shabbos in a perek called Perek Rebbe Kiva. Continues Reb Tzadok HaKohen and says, you're about to learn the Agadita of the destruction of Beis HaMikdash. What do you think? It's Stam here. What's the name of the chapter? There's a few Gemaros here, those who want. Daf Nun Hey Amud Beis, Nun Vav, Nun Zayin, Nun Ches Amud Aleph. It's in Perek called HaNizakin. Not in Masechet Sanhedrin, HaNiskalin. HaNizakin, damages. Got damage? We can pay. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said about himself in Baba Kama Daf Samech. I am the one who lit the fire, but I will rebuild. It's a nezek. It's not a permanent skila that there's no coming back from. It's in Maseches Gittin. It's a get, but there's a mitzvah. Machzir Gushasoi. So we wait for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in fact, to do that. In many places in Chazal, in Yerushalmi, Midrashim, we learn that HaKadosh Baruch Hu keeps his entire Torah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Mekayim all the mitzvahs. There's no real mitzvah of Machzir Gushasoi. It's not one of the Torah, contrary to what people believe. It's also not exactly a Derabanon, but there's definitely an Inyan, Minchas Chinuch, who brings it. Machzir Gushasoi. So we wait for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In fact, it is reversible. It's not in Niskalin, it's only in Nizakin. In Yimitz Hashem, in fact, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, real soon, will be Mismale Rachamim, and will bring us back. Second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam. Machloikes Lashon Hara. The first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. In Adorim Pei Aleph, B'Metzia Pei Hei, we learn Shelo Berchu B'Torah Tchila. In the Ran's languages, Shelo Hayta HaTorah Chashuva Be'eneihem Kol Kach. They learned it. They studied a lot of Torah. But it wasn't so important in their eyes. So I think the ultimate tikkun for that is when we gather publicly to learn Torah. When we're exempt from Talmud Torah, that's the tikkun. Shelo Hayta HaTorah Chashuva Be'eneihem Kol Kach. We show HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yes, in fact, it is extremely important to us. Not only are we exempt, we're also fasting. But we come to learn His Torah. And when we gather, that's the tikkun for the lack of achdus that they had back then, and we're misakin that in Yimitz Hashem. With the schus of Torah, the schus of achdus in Yimitz Hashem. This will be the last time we learn the stories of destruction. 1953 years. Next year, Yimitz Hashem, we start a new count. The stories of Geula. So before we jump into the Gemara, the fourth wide line, Nun Hey Amud Beis, we're going to learn the first Maises, the famous Akamtza Ubar Kamtza. But before that, I want to ask you a question, or maybe tell you a little history that you may not all be familiar with. Do you know that before Second World War, before the Holocaust, I think 1930 or 31, there was a Yid who traveled to Germany to meet with Hitler, to plan the destruction of the Jewish nation. The annihilation, complete annihilation of the Jewish nation. What in the, you know this historical fact? People are shaking their head. Not familiar. What in the world can cause a Yid to do such a crazy thing? You know what was his name? His name was Mr. Bar Kamsa. What happened with Bar Kamsa? We know the story, we're going to see it in a second. Kamsa and Bar Kamsa have an issue. Baal HaSeuda has an issue with Bar Kamsa. Bar Kamsa is so insulted. And in fact, it's a terrible thing. What happened to him? Everybody was quiet. The guy embarrassed him publicly. Terrible. Very, very sad. So he has an issue. He doesn't have an issue with the Baal HaSeuda, the one who invited him, because the Mefarshim say he knew that if he was in the same position, he would do the same. Therefore, his anger was geared towards the Rabbonim, the Talmidei Chachamim. They're not saying anything. So who was there? The Chaim Kanievsky? So go to his house, I'll tell you where it is, Rashbam 23, and shoot him. You have a problem, who Chazon Ish was there? Destroy his car. Who else was there? Rabbi Yosef? Who was there? Gedoyle Yisrael. Deal with them. But what does he do? Let me go to the Caesar and say very kind things about my own people. And as a result, my dear Caesar, they rebelled against you. What's going to happen? He's going to destroy the entire nation. That means he's going to destroy his own family, his friends, somewhere else, not in this town. He does have friends. He does have mishpacha somewhere, but he doesn't care. What distorted, crooked mind can do such a thing? It was wrong what I said before. No one met Hitler before the Holocaust. This guy is that guy in Hitler is the Caesar. It's the same thing. But Chazal don't tell us stories stam. There's something to learn from it. And I think the Musa Haskell is too. When you get upset, as all the Bali Musa say, don't react. Wait, analyze it. Come back in a week, in a month, in 3 months. Analyze, sit and analyze. Don't work out of anger. Because in one's ire, he can do the craziest things in the world. But maybe even more important. It's clear that this guy didn't consult with anyone, not even with his wife. Because even if his wife is crazy like him, she would say, but wait a second. What about my mishpoche? I have mishpoche. What about our friends? And he certainly didn't consult with Dastoya. What about going to your rabbi? Who is the rabbi of this guy? Does he even have a rabbi? Go to the Chacham and ask him. Obviously, he didn't do so. And the result is not just his family and friends. We are sitting here today because of that. 1953 years, I think, are sufficient to give this person, Mr. Bar Kamsa, the title, the greatest Rasha in Jewish history. We are here today because of him. He sealed the deal. But we'll see a few more things that happen.
תדבק לשוני